The moment Cade Mercer handed over $50 for another man's daughter, he knew three things with absolute certainty. He'd just made the worst decision of his life, it was probably going to get him killed, and walking away would have destroyed whatever was left of his soul. Vernon Hale's hand shook as he pocketed the money, not from shame, but from the withdrawal that had him sweating in 20-degree weather. Behind them, the young woman didn't make a sound. She just kept peeling that apple, the knife moving in slow, deliberate circles while her father sold her like livestock in front of the mourning crowd. That silence would haunt Cade for months. But what came after? The confrontation in the snow, the gunfire, the moment she finally screamed back at the man who'd broken her, that would change everything. This is a story about what happens when broken people stop running from each other. It's messy, it's violent, and it doesn't end the way you think. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The town of Ashford Bend died the same way most frontier settlements did, slowly, then all at once. By the winter of 1881, half the storefronts stood empty, their windows dark and their signs hanging crooked from rusted chains. The Silver Valley Railroad had promised to run a line through the basin, and for 2 glorious years, people actually believed prosperity was coming. They built hotels. They opened banks. They printed currency with the town's name stamped across it like a guarantee. Then the railroad went bankrupt, the mines played out, and the people who could afford to leave did exactly that. What remained were the stubborn, the desperate, and the ones too damaged to start over somewhere else. Cade Mercer fell into that last category, though he'd never admit it out loud. He sat on his horse outside Morrison's Feed and Supply, watching his breath fog in the morning cold while he mentally calculated whether he had enough money for the winter or just enough to make himself feel better about slowly starving. The ride down from his mountain cabin had taken 3 hours, and every mile of it had reminded him why he usually avoided town altogether. Too many people, too many questions, too many eyes that lingered on the scar running from his right temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Antietam that had cost him an eye and most of his faith in humanity. He was reaching for his saddlebag when Vernon Hale stumbled out of the alley beside the feed store. Cade recognized him immediately. Everyone in Ashford Bend knew Vernon, not because he was important, but because he was reliably, spectacularly pathetic. A drunk who'd inherited a decent piece of land and systematically destroyed it through neglect and incompetence. His wife had died years ago, some said from pneumonia, others from sheer exhaustion, and he'd raised their daughter alone, which in Vernon's case meant barely raising her at all. Mercer. Vernon's voice cracked on the second syllable. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and tried to straighten up, as if standing upright would somehow make him less of a disaster. "Been hoping to run into you." Cade didn't respond. He'd learned a long time ago that silence made most people uncomfortable enough to leave him alone. Vernon didn't leave. "You still living up on that mountain?" Vernon took a step closer, and the smell of cheap whiskey rolled off him like a fog. "All by yourself?" That's generally what alone means. Cade's hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, not threateningly, just habitually. "What do you want, Vernon?" "I got a business proposition." "Not interested." "You ain't even heard it yet." "Don't need to." Cade gathered his reins, ready to move on. $50, Vernon blurted out. "Cash. Right now." That made Cade pause. $50 was more money than Vernon Hale had seen in years, probably more than he'd see again. Cade turned in his saddle, his good eye narrowing. $50 for what? Vernon's throat worked like he was trying to swallow something solid. "For my daughter." The words hung in the cold air between them. For a moment, Cade wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the feed store's porch, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. The kind of sounds that shouldn't exist in the same moment as what Vernon had just said. "Say that again." Vernon's jaw tightened, and something that might have been shame flickered across his face before dying just as quickly. "You heard me. Elira. She's 20 years old, good worker, doesn't complain. $50 and she's yours. I got debts, Mercer. Serious debts. Men who ain't as patient as the bank." Cade's horse shifted beneath him, sensing the tension in his rider's body. His hand hadn't moved from the rifle, but his grip had tightened enough to make his knuckles white. "You're trying to sell me a human being." "I'm offering you help." Vernon's voice took on a pleading edge. the whine of a man who'd already made peace with his own degradation. She eats too much. Can't afford to keep her. You need someone up on that mountain to cook and clean and keep the place from falling apart. It's practical, for both of us. Practical. Cade repeated the word like it tasted rotten. That's what you're calling this. What do you care? Vernon's desperation was curdling into anger now, the way it always did with men like him. You gonna stand there and judge me? You, with your... He gestured vaguely at Cade's scarred face. You ain't exactly living in polite society yourself. Everybody knows you ain't right since the war. Hell, half the town thinks you're some kind of ghost up there. Cade should have ridden away, should have turned his horse around and headed back up the mountain and spent the rest of the winter pretending this conversation had never happened. But then he saw her. She was standing on the feed store's porch, partially hidden behind one of the support posts. At first glance, she looked like she might blow away in a strong wind, too thin, her dress patched in 3 places he could see, her dark hair pulled back in a braid that had started to unravel. She was holding an apple, turning it slowly in her hands while she peeled it with a small knife. The knife moved in perfect, controlled circles. Her face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, no hope. Just a blank, careful neutrality that hit Cade harder than any expression of terror could have. She wasn't looking at her father, wasn't looking at Cade. She was looking at the apple like it was the only thing in the world that mattered, and Cade suddenly understood that this wasn't the first time Vernon had tried to sell her. This was just the first time someone had stopped to listen. How many men have you offered this deal to? Cade's voice came out flat and cold. Vernon's silence was answer enough. And how many said yes? That ain't look. Do you want her or not? I got other people I can ask. Cade's mind was working through scenarios he didn't want to imagine. Other men. Men who wouldn't hesitate. Men who'd pay $50 or less for reasons that had nothing to do with cooking and cleaning. He looked at the young woman again. She'd finished peeling the apple. She was cutting it into precise, even slices, still not looking up, still not reacting. Like she'd learned a long time ago that reactions only made things worse. Does she have a say in this? Cade asked. Vernon laughed, a bitter sound that ended in a cough. A say? She ain't said more than 10 words to me in a month. Girl's half simple, if you ask me. But she works hard and she don't cause trouble. I didn't ask you about her work ethic. I asked if she gets a say. You want her or not, Mercer? Vernon was sweating despite the cold. Because I got bills due and I'm running out of time. $50. That's the price. You can treat her however you want once she's yours. I don't care. The honest truth of that last sentence was somehow worse than everything that had come before it. Cade looked at the young woman one more time. She'd put down the apple and was wiping the knife on her dress, her movements slow and methodical. Her hands weren't shaking. His were. He was about to make a decision that would either save a life or ruin 2 of them. 60, Cade said. Vernon blinked. What? $60. But I want papers. Something that says she's free to leave whenever she wants. Not purchased. Not owned. Employed. That's not how this works. That's how it works if you want my money. Cade swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the frozen ground hard enough to send a jolt through his bad knee. He pulled a small leather wallet from his coat pocket, counted out bills that represented most of his savings, and held them just out of Vernon's reach. Papers that say she's a free woman working for wages. You write them out right now in front of witnesses, or this conversation is over. Vernon's eyes locked onto the money the way a drowning man looks at a rope. Fine. Morrison's got paper and ink inside. They went into the feed store, where Albert Morrison, a decent man who'd clearly heard every word through the thin walls, wordlessly provided paper and a pen. Vernon's handwriting was barely legible, his hand shaking from withdrawal and shame in equal measure. But he managed to scratch out a document that stated Elira Hale was entering into free employment with Cade Mercer, with the right to leave said employment at any time. It wasn't legally binding. It wouldn't hold up in any court. But it was something. Morrison signed as a witness. So did Ruth Cassidy, the store clerk who'd been stocking shelves and trying not to stare. Vernon grabbed the money the second Cade released it, counted it twice, and walked out without another word to his daughter. Cade stood there with a piece of paper that made him an employer and a responsibility he had no idea how to handle. Morrison cleared his throat. You know what you just did? Not really. That girl's been trying to disappear for years. Now you've made her visible." Morrison's expression was hard to read. "Hope you're ready for that." Cade wasn't ready for any of it, but he walked out of the store anyway, the paper folded in his pocket, and found Elira exactly where she'd been before, standing on the porch, holding the apple she'd never eaten. Up close, he could see more details. The shadows under her eyes, the way her dress hung loose on a frame that should have carried more weight, the small scar on her left hand that looked like it had come from a burn. "My name's Cade Mercer," he said, and then felt immediately stupid because of course she knew that. Everyone knew who he was, the mountain ghost, the man who'd come back from the war and never really come back at all. She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. "Your father and I made an arrangement," Cade continued, keeping his voice level and low, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "I need help with my place up the mountain. You'd have your own space, your own wages. You can leave whenever you want. That's in writing." Nothing. Not even a flicker of recognition. "I know you don't have any reason to trust me," Cade said. "Hell, I wouldn't trust me either. But I'm asking you to come with me anyway, because I think if you stay here, someone worse is going to make your father a different offer." That got a reaction. Just the smallest one, a tightening around her eyes that suggested she'd already thought about that possibility. Probably thought about it a lot. "I can't promise it'll be easy," Cade said. "The cabin's rough. The work's hard. Winter's already setting in and it's going to get worse. But I can promise you won't be hurt. Not by me. Not by anyone, if I can help it." Elira looked at him for the first time. Really looked at him. Her eyes were brown, he realized. Dark brown, like creek water in shadow. They moved across his face. The scar, the missing eye, the hard lines that came from years of not smiling. And he had the uncomfortable feeling of being assessed and measured. She set the apple on the porch railing. "I'll need to get my things," she said. Her voice was quiet. Rusty, like she didn't use it often. But it was steady. "All right," Cade said. "I'll wait here." She went inside the feed store, and Morrison must have let her through to the back because she disappeared for about 10 minutes. When she came back, she was carrying a cloth bag that looked like it couldn't possibly hold more than a couple of items. That was it. 20 years of life and everything she owned fit in a bag the size of a flour sack. "Ready?" Cade asked. She nodded. He helped her onto his horse. She weighed almost nothing, he noticed, and she flinched when his hand touched her arm, and then swung up behind her. It was the most physically close he'd been to another human being in years, and it felt wrong and necessary in equal measure. They rode out of Ashford Bend with half the town watching from windows and doorways. Cade could feel their stares, could practically hear the gossip already forming. The mountain ghost had bought Vernon Hale's daughter. The stories would spread. They'd get worse with each telling. Let them talk. He'd stopped caring what people said about him a long time ago. The ride up the mountain took 3 hours, and they didn't speak once. Elira sat rigid in front of him, her spine straight as a fence post, her hands gripping the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her from falling into an abyss. Cade kept expecting her to ask questions, where they were going, what he expected from her, why he'd done this. But she stayed silent. Maybe she'd learned that questions were dangerous. Maybe she just didn't care about the answers anymore. The cabin appeared as the sun was starting its descent toward the peaks. It wasn't much. A single-room structure Cade had built himself from timber and stubbornness, with a lean-to for the horse and a small shed for supplies. Smoke would rise from the chimney on cold nights, and sometimes that smoke was the only proof that anyone lived up here at all. Cade dismounted first, then helped Elira down. She looked at the cabin with an expression he couldn't decipher, then looked at the mountains rising up behind it, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "It's not much," Cade said, feeling the need to fill the silence. "But it's solid. Roof doesn't leak. Stove works. There's a creek about 50 yards that way." He pointed. "And a root cellar out back. I mostly hunt for meat, but I've got dried goods stored. You'll have the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." Elira's eyes snapped to him. "You're giving me the bed?" It was the most words she'd said at once, and there was something like disbelief in her voice. "It's the only bed," Cade said. "I don't need much sleep anyway." She stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "Let me show you inside," he said. The cabin's interior was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd been living alone for 5 years, functional, sparse, and meticulously organized out of military habit. A wooden bed frame in one corner with a straw mattress and wool blankets. A cast iron stove that served for both heating and cooking. A table with two chairs that Cade had never needed two chairs for until today. Shelves holding tin plates, cups, basic utensils. A rifle mounted above the door and another one hidden under the bed. Everything a person needed to survive. Nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. Alira set her bag down near the door and stood there, waiting. "You can put your things anywhere you want," Cade said. "The chest at the foot of the bed is empty. You can use it." She didn't move. "Are you hungry?" he tried. "I've got salt pork and beans, some hardtack. It's not fancy, but what do you want from me?" The question cut through his rambling. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something sharp underneath it now. Something that had been honed by years of disappointment and fear. Cade met her eyes. "I want you to not die. That's it." People don't just do things for nothing. "No," he agreed. "They don't. So here's the truth. I need help keeping this place running, cooking, cleaning, mending, preserving food for winter. I'm not good at any of that. I can pay you in room and board for now, and actual wages once I sell some pelts in the spring. In exchange, you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from or whether someone's going to hurt you. That's the arrangement." Alira's jaw worked like she was chewing on words she didn't want to say. "And if I want to leave? Then you leave. I'll take you back to town myself if that's what you want." Just like that. Just like that. She didn't believe him. He could see it in the way her shoulders stayed tense, in the way her eyes kept flicking to the door like she was measuring the distance. She'd been lied to before, probably her whole life. "Look," Cade said, pulling out one of the chairs and sitting down so he'd be less physically imposing. "I'm not good with people. Haven't been for a long time. I don't know the right things to say, and I'm probably going to do this all wrong. But I'm telling you the truth. You're safe here. You can trust that, even if you can't trust me yet." Alira stood there for another long moment, her thin frame silhouetted against the fading light from the window. Then, slowly, she picked up her bag and carried it to the chest. She opened it, the hinges creaked, and began unpacking. 2 dresses, both worn thin, a sewing kit, a book with a cracked spine, a small wooden box that she opened carefully, revealing a handful of buttons that looked like they'd been collected over years. That was everything. Cade stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with watching her organize the fragments of her life. "I'll get some firewood. You settle in." He went outside before she could respond, and spent the next 20 minutes splitting logs with more force than was strictly necessary. The physical work helped. It always did. Gave him something to focus on besides the weight of what he'd just done. By the time he came back inside, arms loaded with wood, Alira had changed into her other dress and was examining the stove like she was trying to figure out its secrets. "It's temperamental," Cade said, stacking the wood beside it. "Damper sticks sometimes. You have to jiggle it." He showed her, and she watched with the kind of focus that suggested she was memorizing every movement. Then she looked at the shelves where he kept his meager food supplies. "I can make something," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to." So he let her. He sat at the table and pretended to clean his rifle while she moved around the small space. Her movements economical and practiced. She found the salt pork, the beans, some wild onions he'd foraged. Within 30 minutes, the cabin smelled like actual cooking instead of the bachelor fare he usually threw together. They ate in silence. The food was better than anything Cade had made in years, and he told her so. Alira looked down at her plate. "It's just beans. Best beans I've had in a long time." She didn't respond, but something in her posture softened slightly. Not much, just enough to notice. After dinner, Cade washed the dishes while Alira sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, clearly unsure what to do with herself. The sun had set completely now, and the only light came from the fire in the stove and a single oil lamp on the table. "You should get some rest," Cade said. "It's been a long day. Where will you sleep?" "I'll pull the chair close to the fire. I've slept in worse places." She looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't know how. Finally, she nodded and lay down on the bed, still wearing her dress, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Cade settled into the chair with his rifle across his lap, a position that had become second nature during the war and never really left him. He listened to Alira's breathing gradually slow and deepen, though he suspected she wasn't actually asleep. Just pretending, because pretending was safer than acknowledging the strangeness of this situation. He didn't sleep either, He sat there in the firelight, watching shadows dance across the log walls, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the mountain passes with a sound like distant screaming. Winter was coming early this year. He could feel it in his bones, in the ache of old wounds that never quite healed. He'd brought a stranger into his home, a damaged, frightened woman who had every reason to distrust him and no reason to stay. He'd made promises he wasn't sure he could keep, taken on a responsibility that terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. But when he closed his good eye and tried to imagine leaving her in that town, letting Vernon sell her to someone else, he saw that blank expression on her face as she peeled that apple. That terrible, practiced neutrality. No, he'd made the right choice, even if it destroyed them both. The fire cracked and popped. Elira shifted in her sleep, making a small sound that might have been a word or might have been nothing. Cade tightened his grip on the rifle and kept watch, the way he'd kept watch for 5 years, waiting for threats that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. The first night passed slowly, measured in heartbeats and the gradual dimming of the fire. By morning, nothing had changed and everything had changed. Elira was still there, still alive, still breathing. For now, that was enough. The morning after Elira arrived, Cade woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, still caught in the fog between sleep and consciousness, he thought he'd imagined it. He'd been dreaming about the war again, the same dream he always had, where he was back at Antietam trying to reload his rifle while the world exploded around him. And the scent of coffee seemed too ordinary, too domestic to be real. Then he opened his eye and saw her standing at the stove, her back to him, pouring water from the kettle into his battered tin coffee pot. She was already dressed, her hair braided and pinned up, and the cabin was warmer than it had been in months. She must have woken before dawn to get the fire going, must have moved around the small space quietly enough not to wake him. The realization made him uncomfortable. He was supposed to be the light sleeper, the one who woke at every sound. The fact that she'd managed to get up and start her day without him noticing felt like a failure. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice rough from sleep. Elira turned, and for a split second he saw fear flash across her face before she locked it down behind that careful blankness. "You said you needed help with cooking." "I meant eventually, not at dawn on your first day here." She didn't respond, just turned back to the stove and focused on the coffee like it required her complete attention. Cade stood up from the chair, his back protesting the night spent at an awkward angle, and tried to figure out what to say next. He'd never been good at conversation even before the war. Now, trying to talk to this woman who flinched every time he moved too quickly, he felt like he was navigating a minefield blindfolded. "How'd you sleep?" he tried. "Fine." It was obviously a lie. He could see the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself like she was braced for something to go wrong. She probably hadn't slept at all. "The bed's not very comfortable," he said. "Mattress needs restuffing. I can do that today if it's fine." Elira said, "The coffee's ready." She poured 2 cups without asking if he wanted any, her movements precise and controlled. She handed him one and kept the other for herself, wrapping her thin fingers around the tin like she was trying to absorb its heat. They stood there in awkward silence, drinking coffee that was actually good, better than the bitter sludge he usually made, while the morning light started filtering through the cabin's small windows. Outside, a crow called, and Cade's horse whinnied from the lean-to, probably annoyed that breakfast was late. "I need to feed the animals," Cade said finally. "Check the traps. Should be back in a couple of hours. You don't have to do anything while I'm gone. Just make yourself at home." Elira nodded, still not meeting his eyes. He pulled on his coat, grabbed his rifle, and headed out into the cold. The temperature had dropped overnight, and his breath came out in white clouds. Winter was definitely coming early this year. He needed to get more firewood cut, needed to check the cabin's chinking for gaps, needed to make sure they had enough supplies to last until spring. They. The word felt strange in his head. He'd been thinking in terms of singular survival for so long that plural planning seemed like a foreign language. He fed his horse, a big sorrel gelding named Red, who'd carried him through the last year of the war and the 5 years after, and then headed up the slope to check his trap line. He'd set snares for rabbits and a deadfall trap for anything bigger, and he was rewarded with 2 fat rabbits that would make decent eating. He cleaned them there in the woods, his hands working from muscle memory while his mind wandered back to the cabin. What was she doing right now? Was she scared? Was she planning to run? Should he have locked the rifle away so she wouldn't feel threatened by it? Or would that have made things worse, made her feel trapped? He didn't know. He'd spent 5 years avoiding these kinds of questions, and now they were unavoidable. When he got back to the cabin 2 hours later, he found it transformed. Not dramatically, not in any way that would be obvious to someone who didn't live there. But Cade noticed. The floor had been swept. The table had been scrubbed clean of the water stains and food marks he'd stopped seeing months ago. His spare clothes, which he'd left in a pile by the bed, were now folded neatly on the chest. The tin plates and cups on the shelves were arranged by size. Even the firewood by the stove had been restacked into a more efficient configuration. Alira was standing at the table with her sewing kit open, mending one of his shirts. The shirt in question had been missing 2 buttons for the better part of a year, and he'd gotten used to just leaving the collar open. Now she was carefully stitching on replacements from her collection, her needle moving with the same practiced precision she'd used when peeling that apple. She looked up when he came in, her hands stilling. "I hope you don't mind. I needed something to do." "It's fine." He hung his rifle above the door and set the rabbits on the table. "More than fine. Thank you." She glanced at the rabbits. "I can cook those for dinner." "You don't have to." "I want to." There was something almost desperate in the way she said it, like she needed to prove her worth through labor. "Please." Cade nodded slowly. "All right. I'll skin them." "I'll skin." He took the rabbits outside to finish the job properly, and when he brought the meat back in, Alira was already preparing vegetables from his root cellar. She worked quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd been cooking her whole life, which she probably had, he realized. Vernon certainly hadn't been feeding himself all those years. They fell into an uneasy routine over the next few days. Cade would wake to find Alira already up, the fire going, coffee made. He'd do the outside work, feeding animals, checking traps, chopping wood, while she cleaned and cooked and mended everything she could get her hands on. They'd eat meals in near silence, his attempts at conversation bouncing off her monosyllabic responses. At night, she'd retreat to the bed and he'd take the chair by the fire, both of them pretending to sleep while actually lying awake for hours. It was functional, it was practical, it was slowly driving Cade insane. On the 4th day, he came back from checking the trap line to find her scrubbing the cabin's floorboards on her hands and knees, even though she'd already cleaned them 2 days ago. "Alira, you don't need to do that." She didn't stop scrubbing. "It was dirty." "It's a cabin in the woods. It's always going to be dirty. I can make it better." "That's not the point." He crouched down so he could see her face. "You don't have to earn your keep every second of every day. You're allowed to rest." Her hand finally stilled on the brush. "What else am I supposed to do?" The question hung between them, and Cade suddenly understood. She didn't know how to just exist, didn't know how to be a person instead of a tool. Every moment of her life had been defined by what she could provide, what work she could do, how invisible she could make herself. "You could read," he suggested. "I saw you had a book. I've already read it 6 times. Then read it a 7th time. Or go for a walk. Or sit by the fire and do nothing. That's allowed." She looked at him like he'd suggested she sprout wings and fly. "I don't know how to do nothing." "Neither do I," Cade admitted, "but maybe we could both learn." That almost got a smile. Almost, just the tiniest softening around her mouth before the walls went back up. "I'll try," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. That night, Cade made a decision. After dinner, rabbit stew that was genuinely the best thing he'd eaten in years, he pulled out a carved wooden box he kept hidden under a loose floorboard. Inside were things he hadn't looked at in months. Letters from his sister back east, a photograph of his parents, long dead, a pocket watch that had stopped working at Antietam and never started again, and a harmonica. He'd played it before the war, played it during the war too sometimes, on those rare, quiet nights when the officers weren't yelling and the artillery wasn't firing. He hadn't touched it since coming to the mountain. He brought it to his lips and played a few experimental notes. They came out rough, out of practice, but recognizable. An old folk tune his mother used to sing. Alira looked up from the sock she was darning, her eyes wide. "My mother taught me this one," Cade said, and played it through properly this time. The melody was simple, a little melancholy, the kind of song that felt appropriate for cold nights and long winters. When he finished, Alira was staring at him. "That was beautiful." Haven't played in years, probably sounded like a dying cat. No. She set down her darning. It was beautiful. Do you know any others? He did. He played 3 more songs, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Elira's face showed something other than fear or careful neutrality. She looked almost peaceful. When he finished the last song, she actually smiled. A small, fragile thing, but real. Thank you, she said quietly. You're welcome. Something shifted after that. Not dramatically, not overnight. But slowly, like ice thawing at the edges of a pond, Elira began to thaw too. She started asking questions. Small ones at first. Where did he get his water? How did he know which plants were safe to eat? What were the names of the peaks surrounding the cabin? Cade answered each one as thoroughly as he could, grateful for the conversation even if it was mostly one-sided. Then, about 2 weeks after she'd arrived, she asked a different kind of question. Why did you buy me? They were sitting at the table after dinner, and the question came out of nowhere. Cade had been cleaning his rifle, and his hand stopped moving. I told you, I needed help with the cabin. There are other ways to get help. You could have hired someone from town, could have put up a notice. Maybe. So why didn't you? Cade set down the rifle and met her eyes. Because your father was going to sell you to someone. If not me, then someone else. And I couldn't walk away knowing what might happen to you. You don't know me. Why would you care what happened to me? Because nobody else did. The words came out harsher than he intended. Because I saw you standing on that porch, and you weren't even trying to run or fight or scream. You'd just given up, and I've been there. After the war, I spent 2 years wishing I'd died with the rest of my regiment. I know what it looks like when someone stops caring if they live or die. And I couldn't leave you there. Elira was quiet for a long moment. Then, what changed? For you, I mean. You said you spent 2 years wishing you were dead. What made you stop? Cade thought about it. Stubbornness, mostly. I was too mean to die. And I figured if I was going to keep breathing, I might as well do something with it. Built this cabin. Started living like a person instead of a ghost. It's not much, but it's mine. It's more than I've ever had, Elira said softly. The temperature dropped hard at the end of November. Cade woke one morning to find snow falling in thick, heavy flakes that would have been beautiful if they weren't so dangerous. This was the kind of snow that could trap you for weeks, that could kill you if you weren't prepared. We need to get more firewood, he told Elira over breakfast. This storm's going to last a while. I'll help. You don't have to. I want to. She was already pulling on the oversized coat he'd given her. It had belonged to him during the war and it swallowed her frame completely, but it was warm. Show me what to do. So he did. He taught her how to split logs properly, how to stack them so they'd dry, how to carry an armload without throwing out your back. She was stronger than she looked, though she tired quickly. Years of near starvation had left her with almost no reserves. They worked together for hours, and for the first time Cade heard her laugh. It happened when he slipped on an icy patch and nearly dropped an entire armload of wood. The sound was startled, quickly stifled, but genuine. You can laugh, he said, grinning despite his bruised pride. I won't mind. Sorry. Don't be sorry. It's nice to hear. She looked away, but he caught the ghost of a smile on her face. That night, the storm hit in earnest. Wind howled around the cabin like something alive and angry, and snow piled up against the walls until Cade couldn't see more than a few feet past the windows. They were well and truly trapped. How long will it last? Elira asked, standing at the window and watching the white chaos outside. Hard to say. Could be a day. Could be 3. And we have enough supplies? Plenty. Food, water, firewood. We're fine. He paused. Are you worried? A little, she admitted. I've never been snowed in before. My father's house was in town. We could always get out if we needed to. We're safe here, Cade assured her. Cabin's solid. And even if we get buried, we can dig out once it stops. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. As the day wore on and the storm showed no signs of stopping, her anxiety became more visible. She cleaned things that were already clean, reorganized shelves that didn't need reorganizing, checked the food supplies 3 times. Elira, Cade said finally, you're going to wear a hole in the floor with all that pacing. I need to do something. Why? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Because if I don't, I'll think too much. Think about what? She was quiet for a long time. Then, about how small this cabin is, about how we're stuck here, about what would happen if something went wrong. Kate understood then. She was scared, not of the storm, but of the situation, of being trapped with a man she barely knew, in a place she couldn't escape from. "You want to hear something funny?" he said. "I've been scared of the same thing. Scared you'd realize you're stuck on a mountain with a half-crazy war veteran and panic." Elira turned to look at him. "You're not crazy." "I'm not entirely sane either." He gestured to his scarred face. "Took shrapnel to the head at Antietam. Lost the eye. Had a skull fracture. Doctor said I was lucky to survive, but some days I'm not so sure. I get headaches that last for days. Sometimes I can't remember things right. And the nightmares..." He trailed off. "I hear you," Elira said quietly. "At night, you talk in your sleep sometimes." "Sorry. Don't be. I understand nightmares." They looked at each other across the small cabin, two damaged people recognizing the same wounds in each other. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Cade said. "I suppose we are." The storm lasted 3 days. By the end of it, they'd run out of polite small talk and moved into actual conversation. Elira told him about her mother, who died when she was 12. About the house she'd grown up in, which her father had slowly destroyed through neglect. About the books she'd read in secret because Vernon thought reading was a waste of time for women. Cade told her about his parents' farm in Pennsylvania, about joining the army at 19 because it seemed like an adventure, about the things he'd seen at Bull Run, Fredericksburg, Antietam, about coming home to find his parents dead and his sister married and moved away, about deciding he couldn't live around people anymore and heading west until he found a mountain far enough from civilization to let him breathe. On the third night, when the storm finally started to break, Elira asked him to play the harmonica again. He did, running through every song he could remember, and when he finished, she was crying. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I don't know why I'm crying." "You don't need a reason." Cade set down the harmonica. "Sometimes you just need to let it out." "I haven't cried in years," she said. "Not since my mother died. I learned it didn't help. Crying just made my father angry. He's not here anymore. I know, I don't know how to do this. How to be a person. Everything I do, everything I am, it's all been about surviving him. And now he's gone and I don't know who I'm supposed to be." "You're supposed to be yourself," Cade said, "whatever that looks like." "I don't know who that is." "Then I guess you get to figure it out." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the slowly clearing sky. "We both do. Start over. Be different people than we were." Elira joined him at the window. "Is that what you're doing up here? Starting over?" "Trying to. Not sure I'm very good at it." "You took me in," she pointed out. "That seems like a good start." They stood there together, watching the storm fade and the stars emerge, and Cade felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Cade had to dig them out. The snow had piled up past the door. But once he cleared a path, the world outside was transformed into something almost beautiful. Everything was white and clean and new. Elira came outside bundled in every piece of warm clothing she owned and just stared. "It's so quiet," she said. "Always is after a big storm, like the world's holding its breath." She walked a few steps from the cabin, then a few more, her boots crunching through the fresh snow. Then she bent down, scooped up a handful, and threw it at him. The snowball hit him square in the chest. Cade looked down at the snow sliding down his coat, then up at Elira, who had her hand over her mouth like she couldn't believe what she'd just done. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I don't know why I—" He threw one back. It was a terrible throw. He'd never had good aim with his left eye, and it sailed past her head by a foot, but the intent was clear. Elira's eyes widened. Then she laughed, actually laughed, and threw another one. This one missed entirely. They had a snowball fight that would have embarrassed any child. Their aim was awful. They both slipped multiple times, and within 10 minutes they were both soaked and freezing and laughing so hard they could barely breathe. When they finally called a truce and stumbled back inside, Cade couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this alive. They changed into dry clothes and huddled by the fire, drinking hot coffee and grinning at each other like idiots. "That was fun," Elira said, and she sounded surprised by the observation. "It was," Cade agreed. Can we do it again sometime? Whenever you want. December settled in with the kind of cold that made your lungs hurt, and life on the mountain developed its own rhythm. Cade would do the heavy work, hunting, trapping, maintaining the cabin, while Elira handled everything inside. But increasingly, the division wasn't so rigid. She'd come with him to check the trap line sometimes, learning to read animal tracks in the snow. He'd help her with cooking, discovering he actually enjoyed it when someone else was there to talk to. She was changing, filling out a little as regular meals added weight to her frame, speaking more freely, asking questions without that terrified edge to her voice, smiling occasionally, even arguing with him when she disagreed about something, which happened more often than he'd expected. "You can't just eat meat and beans all winter," she said one afternoon when he came back from hunting with another rabbit. "You need vegetables, variety." "We have potatoes." "Potatoes aren't enough. You'll get sick." "I've been doing this for 5 years and I'm fine." "You're not fine. You limp every morning because your joints are inflamed, probably from malnutrition. Your gums bleed when you brush your teeth. Those are signs of scurvy." Cade blinked. "How do you know that?" "I read it in a book. My mother had medical texts. I used to sneak them when my father was drunk." She crossed her arms. "We need vitamin C, wild rose hips if we can find them under the snow, pine needle tea. Anything." "Fine," Cade said, oddly pleased by her assertiveness. "We'll look for rose hips tomorrow." They did, trudging through deep snow to a patch of wild roses Cade vaguely remembered seeing in the fall. Elira gathered the dried hips with the focus of a surgeon, explaining how to prepare them, how long to steep them, what symptoms to watch for. That night, drinking bitter rose hip tea that tasted like medicine but probably was medicine, Cade realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was taking control, making decisions, becoming someone who existed beyond fear. It scared him how much he was starting to depend on her presence. One night in mid-December, Cade woke from a nightmare worse than usual. He was back at Antietam, watching men die, feeling the explosion that took his eye, drowning in blood and screams and chaos. He jerked awake with a shout that echoed through the small cabin. Elira was there immediately, kneeling beside his chair. "You're safe," she said quietly. "You're in the cabin. You're safe." His heart was racing, his breath coming in gasps. The nightmare still clung to him like cobwebs. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't asleep." She fetched a cup of water and handed it to him. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No. Yes. I don't know." He drank the water, his hands shaking. "It's always the same dream, the battle, the explosion, watching my friends die and not being able to save them. My mother used to say nightmares were our mind's way of trying to process things too big to understand," Elira said. "She had them too after my little brother died. Stillborn, she blamed herself. Did they ever stop?" "No, but she learned to live with them." Elira sat down on the floor, leaning against the chair. She said the trick was not fighting them, just letting them happen and remembering they weren't real. "They feel real." "I know." They sat together in the firelight until Cade's breathing returned to normal and the last vestiges of the nightmare faded. When he finally felt steady enough to speak, he looked down at her. "Thank you." "You've given me a place where I feel safe," she said. "The least I can do is return the favor." Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding. A recognition that they were both broken in their own ways, but maybe together they could hold each other up. Christmas came without fanfare. Neither of them had much experience with celebration, but Elira insisted on making something special. She used their limited supplies to create a meal that was almost festive: roasted rabbit with wild herbs, biscuits made with precious flour, even a pie made from preserved berries. "This is amazing," Cade said, genuinely impressed. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "My mother. Before she died, she taught me everything she knew, said a woman needed to be able to feed herself and the people she cared about." Elira paused. "I didn't have anyone to care about for a long time. It's nice to cook for someone who appreciates it." "I appreciate it. Believe me." After dinner, Cade gave her a present he'd been working on in secret, a new handle for her knife, carved from a piece of antler and fitted perfectly to her hand. It wasn't much, but her eyes lit up when she saw it. "You made this?" "Figured you needed a better grip. That old handle was falling apart." She tested it, her smile growing. It's perfect. Thank you. You're welcome. Then she handed him something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a new shirt, hand-sewn from fabric she must have been hoarding from somewhere. The stitching was immaculate, every seam perfect. Elira, I can't accept this. This must have taken you weeks. I wanted to make you something. You've given me so much. She looked down. It's just a shirt. It's not just a shirt. He folded it carefully, touched in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Thank you. They spent the evening by the fire, Cade playing the harmonica while Elira hummed along. It wasn't a traditional Christmas by any measure, but it was the best one either of them had had in years. As January approached, bringing with it even colder temperatures and more snow, Cade noticed Elira spending more time at the window, staring out at the white landscape. What are you thinking about? He asked one day. How different this is from a year ago. Last winter, I was so cold all the time. The house had gaps in the walls, and my father wouldn't waste firewood heating my room. I used to sleep in all my clothes and still wake up with frost on my blanket. She turned to look at him. Here, I'm warm. I'm fed. I'm safe. I keep waiting for it to end. It's not going to end. How can you be sure? Because I won't let it. The words came out fiercer than he intended. You're not going back to that life. I promise you that. Elira searched his face like she was trying to determine if he meant it. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. I believe you. But the peace didn't last. It couldn't. The world outside the mountain had a way of intruding, even on the most isolated places. And Vernon Hale was exactly the kind of man who couldn't let go of what he thought belonged to him. The first sign of trouble came in late January, when Cade was out checking his traps and found 3 of them deliberately destroyed. Not sprung by animals. Destroyed. Smashed with something heavy, the mechanisms bent and useless. Someone had been here. He gathered the remains and headed back to the cabin, his mind racing through possibilities. Could be a wandering trapper who didn't like competition. Could be kids from town playing a prank, though that seemed unlikely given the distance. Could be something worse. When he got back, Elira took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. What happened? He showed her the traps. Someone's been on the mountain. Her face went pale. Do you think? I don't know. Could be nothing. Could be your father. He set the traps down and reached for his rifle. But from now on, you don't go outside alone, understand? She nodded, and just like that, the fear was back in her eyes. That terrible familiar fear he'd thought was finally fading. Cade cursed himself for bringing it up so bluntly. But they needed to be careful. Because if Vernon Hale had decided he wanted his daughter back, this isolated cabin suddenly wasn't safe at all. It was a fortress with only one defender and one rifle, miles from any help. And winter had them trapped just as surely as any cage. The destroyed traps changed everything. For 3 days, Cade saw no further signs of intrusion, but the damage was done. The easy peace they'd built over the winter shattered like ice under a boot, and Elira retreated back into herself. She stopped humming while she worked, stopped asking questions, started flinching again at sudden movements. You need to learn to shoot, Cade said on the 4th morning, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. Elira looked up from the bread dough she was kneading, flour dusting her hands and apron. What? If someone comes up here looking for trouble, you need to be able to defend yourself. I can't be everywhere at once. I don't know how to use a gun. That's why I'm going to teach you. He pulled down the spare rifle from above the door, a Winchester repeater he'd been saving for emergencies. After breakfast. We'll start today. She stared at the weapon like it might bite her. I don't think I can. You can peel an apple without looking. You can sew a straight seam in the dark. You can do this. He set the rifle on the table between them. Trust me. That afternoon, they trudged through knee-deep snow to a clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. Cade had fashioned targets from pieces of scrap wood, propping them against a fallen log. The day was clear but bitterly cold, and their breath came out in white clouds that dissipated slowly in the still air. First rule, Cade said, handing her the unloaded rifle. Always assume it's loaded, even when you know it's not. Respect the weapon, or it'll kill you or someone you care about. Elira took it gingerly, holding it away from her body like it was a snake. Don't be afraid of it. Here. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip. Stock goes tight against your shoulder, like this. If you hold it loose, the recoil will knock you on your ass. My father never let me touch his guns, she said quietly. Said women didn't need to know about such things. Your father was an idiot. Cade positioned her hands properly on the stock and barrel. Left hand here, supporting the weight. Right hand on the grip, finger outside the trigger guard until you're ready to shoot. Got it? I think so. Show me. She repositioned her hands, getting it almost right. He corrected her grip once more, and she tried again. This time, it was perfect. Good. Now, see that target on the left? I want you to aim at it. Don't shoot yet, just aim. Use the sight here. He tapped the iron sight at the end of the barrel. Line it up with the rear sight and put both on the target. Elira raised the rifle, her arms shaking slightly from the weight, or the cold, or both. She squinted down the barrel, her tongue poking out slightly between her teeth in concentration. Breathe, Cade instructed. You're holding your breath. Breathe normally, in and out, slow. She did, and her arms steadied. Better. Now I'm going to load it. When I do, you're going to squeeze the trigger, not pull. Squeeze. Gentle pressure, like you're trying not to wake someone up. He loaded a single round and stepped back. Whenever you're ready. Elira stood there for a long moment, the rifle aimed at the target. Cade could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was clenched. Then she squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing off the mountain peaks. Elira stumbled backward, nearly dropping the weapon, the recoil having caught her off guard despite his warning. The shot missed the target by 3 feet. That's normal, Cade said quickly, seeing the frustration flash across her face. First shot is always terrible. Let's try again. They practiced for an hour. Elira missed the target repeatedly, and each failure made her more angry, not at Cade, but at herself. He could see it in the set of her mouth, the way her eyes narrowed. You're tensing up, he said after her 10th miss, anticipating the recoil. That's why you keep pulling left. I can't help it. I know it's coming. So stop fighting it. Accept it. The rifle's going to kick no matter what you do. Stop trying to brace for it and just let it happen. She gave him a look that suggested this was terrible advice, but she tried again anyway. This time, the shot hit the log 6 inches below the target. Better, Cade said. Much better. Again. By the time they headed back to the cabin, Elira's shoulder was bruised and her hands were frozen, but she'd managed to hit the target twice. Not center mass, but hits nonetheless. She walked with her head up, something almost like pride in her posture. We'll practice again tomorrow, Cade said, and the day after that, until you can do it without thinking. Why? Elira asked. You really think my father's going to come up here? I think he's desperate enough to try, and desperate men do stupid things. Over the next 3 weeks, they established a new routine. Every afternoon, weather permitting, they'd go to the clearing and Elira would practice. At first, her progress was slow and frustrating. She'd have good days where she hit the target consistently, then bad days where she couldn't hit anything. Her shoulder developed a permanent bruise from the recoil. Her hands got calloused from gripping the stock, but she didn't quit. She'd show up at the clearing every day with grim determination, and Cade found himself impressed by her stubborn refusal to give up. She wasn't naturally talented, her hands were too small for the rifle, and she had to work twice as hard to control the recoil, but she compensated with sheer persistence. You know what your problem is? Cade said one afternoon after she'd missed 5 shots in a row. That I'm terrible at this? That you think too much. You're smart, and that's usually good. But with shooting, you need to turn your brain off. Stop calculating. Stop second-guessing. Just breathe, aim, shoot. That's easy for you to say. No, it's not. I had to learn it too. He picked up the rifle. Watch. He demonstrated, his movements fluid and automatic after years of practice. Load, aim, breathe, squeeze. The target splintered where the bullet struck center mass. You make it look easy, Elira said. It's not easy. It's just repetition, muscle memory. Do something enough times and your body learns it even when your brain's getting in the way. He handed her the rifle back. Try again. But this time, don't think about the target. Don't think about missing or hitting, just feel it. She gave him a skeptical look but raised the rifle anyway. He watched her go through the motions, load, aim, breathe, and then something shifted. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her breathing steadied. She squeezed the trigger and the shot punched through the target dead center. Elira stared at the target, then at the rifle, then back at the target. I did it. You did. I actually hit it. You did more than hit it. That was a kill shot. Cade grinned. Now do it again. She did. And again. And again. By the end of the session, she was hitting the target more often than not, and the smile on her face was the biggest he'd seen since she'd arrived. As February arrived with more snow and dropping temperatures, Alira's skill with the rifle grew. She could load it in the dark now, could hit targets at 50 yards, could shoot from different positions, standing, kneeling, prone. Cade taught her everything he knew, and she absorbed it all with the same focused intensity she brought to everything else. But it wasn't just the shooting that changed her. Something else was happening, something deeper. She started speaking her mind more freely, arguing with him when she disagreed, making decisions about the cabin and their supplies without asking permission first. The frightened woman who'd arrived in November was being replaced by someone harder, sharper, someone who refused to be a victim anymore. One night in mid-February, they were eating dinner when Alira said, "I want to go to town." Cade looked up from his plate. "What?" "To town. Ashford Bend. I want to go." "Why?" "Because I've been on this mountain for 3 months, and I haven't seen another human being except you. Because I want to prove to myself that I can walk through that town without being afraid. Because I need to face it." She set down her fork. "I need to face him." "That's a terrible idea." "Probably, but I'm going anyway." Her jaw set in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. "With or without you." Cade put down his own fork and studied her. She meant it. He could see it in her eyes, the determination that had been building over weeks of target practice and small rebellions. She wasn't asking for permission. She was informing him. "If we go," he said slowly, "you stay close to me. You don't engage with your father if we see him. You don't go anywhere alone. Understood?" "Understood. And you bring the rifle." That surprised her. "In town? Especially in town. Let people see you're armed. Let them know you're not helpless anymore." They made the trip 3 days later on a morning cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. Alira rode in front of Cade on red, the rifle strapped across her back, her spine straight as a flagpole. She'd dressed in her better dress under her heavy coat, and she'd braided her hair with a precision that suggested she was preparing for battle. Maybe she was. The ride down took just under 3 hours, and as they descended into the basin where Ashford Bend sat like a scar on the landscape, Cade felt Alira tense. "You okay?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They rode into town at midday when the main street was relatively busy. People stopped what they were doing to stare. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman actually gasped. The mountain ghost had come down from his perch, and he'd brought Vernon Hale's daughter with him. Cade could practically hear the gossip starting, spreading through the town like wildfire. He ignored it and guided Red to the hitching post outside Morrison's feed and supply. "Same place we started," Alira murmured. "You sure about this?" Instead of answering, she slid down from the horse and adjusted the rifle on her back. Her hands weren't shaking. Cade took that as a good sign. They walked into the store together, and Albert Morrison looked up from the counter. His eyebrows shot up when he saw Alira, then settled into something like approval when he noticed the rifle. "Miss Hale," he said politely. "Mercer." "Morrison," Cade nodded. "We need supplies, coffee, flour, sugar if you've got it, salt pork." "I can do that." Morrison started gathering items, his eyes flicking to Alira repeatedly. "You look well, if you don't mind me saying." "Thank you," Alira said, and her voice was steady, stronger than it had been in November. "I am well." "Glad to hear it. There was some concern after. I'm fine, better than fine." Morrison nodded and continued filling their order. Other customers had started filtering into the store, clearly drawn by the news that Alira was in town. They whispered behind their hands and stared openly. Then the door banged open and Vernon Hale stumbled in. He looked worse than he had 3 months ago. Thinner, more ragged, his eyes bloodshot and his hands shaking. He froze when he saw Alira, and something ugly twisted across his face. "You," he spat. "You got some nerve showing your face here." Alira turned to face him, and Cade was struck by how calm she looked. No fear, no trembling, just cold assessment. "Hello, father?" "Don't you father me! You ran off with this—" He gestured wildly at Cade. This cripple, and left me with nothing. You know what people say about you? What they say about me? I imagine they say you sold your daughter for $60 and a bottle of whiskey. Alira's voice cut like a knife. I imagine they say you're a drunk and a failure who couldn't keep his own land from falling apart. Vernon's face turned purple. You little... I'm not little anymore. Alira took a step forward, and Vernon actually backed up. I'm not the girl you starved and hit and locked in closets when you were too drunk to remember you had a daughter. That girl's gone. You think you're something special now? You think putting on airs and carrying a gun makes you better than what you are? Vernon's voice cracked with rage and desperation. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. Your mother knew it. That's why she died, to get away from you. The words were designed to hurt, and Cade saw them land. Alira flinched, just slightly, and Vernon saw it too. Saw the weakness and went for it like a predator. That's right. Your mother couldn't stand the sight of you. Weak little thing, always crying, always needing. My mother died of pneumonia, Alira said, and her voice was shaking now, but not with fear, with fury. She died because you were too drunk to fetch a doctor. She died because you spent the money for medicine on liquor. She died because of you. That's a lie. It's the truth, and everyone in this town knows it. Alira's hands had curled into fists. Just like they know you beat her. Just like they know you'd beat me if I gave you half a chance, but I won't. I'm never giving you that chance again. Vernon lunged at her then, his hand reaching for her throat, and several things happened simultaneously. Cade moved to intercept, his hand going for his pistol. Morrison shouted something. Two other men in the store started forward. But Alira was faster than all of them. She had the rifle off her back and leveled at Vernon's chest before he'd closed half the distance. Her stance was perfect. Feet planted, stock tight against her shoulder, finger on the trigger. Everything Cade had taught her. Vernon froze, his eyes going wide. Don't, Alira said quietly. Don't touch me. Don't come near me. Don't speak to me. You gave up any right to me when you sold me. I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm not your property. I'm not your anything. You won't shoot, Vernon said, but he didn't sound certain. Try me. The store had gone completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the standoff, and Cade could see people calculating, deciding, choosing sides. Vernon must have seen it too because he slowly raised his hands. You're crazy, he said, just like your mother. Maybe, but I'm alive and I'm free. That's more than you can say. Alira lowered the rifle slightly but kept it ready. I'm going to walk out of here now. You're going to stay exactly where you are. If you follow me, if you come up that mountain, if you ever try to hurt me again, I will put a bullet in you and sleep just fine that night. Do you understand? Vernon didn't respond, but the hatred in his eyes was answer enough. Alira backed toward the door, the rifle still trained on her father. Cade moved with her, keeping himself between her and the rest of the room. When they reached the exit, she finally turned and walked out into the cold afternoon sun. Cade followed, and behind them he heard Morrison say clearly, Vernon, I think you should leave. Now. They mounted Red in silence and rode out of town at a steady pace. Cade kept expecting to hear shouts behind them, kept expecting Vernon to do something stupid, but the town remained quiet. When they were finally out of sight of the buildings, climbing back up the mountain trail, Alira started shaking. Pull up, Cade said. Stop the horse. She did, and he dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her. I'm fine, she said, but she was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. No, you're not. And that's okay. He guided her to a fallen log and sat her down. What you just did took more courage than most soldiers have. You faced your fear, and you won. I almost shot him, Alira whispered. I wanted to. For just a second, I really wanted to pull that trigger. But you didn't. What if I had? Then he would have deserved it. Cade sat down beside her. But you showed more restraint than he ever did. You proved you're nothing like him. Alira was quiet for a long moment, her breathing slowly returning to normal. Then she said, He looked so small. I spent my whole life afraid of him, and when I saw him today, he just looked small, pathetic, broken. That's because you grew and he shrank. You became more and he became less. I don't want to see him again. You probably won't have to. Men like Vernon, When you stand up to them, they usually fold. He'll stay away. Cade hoped that was true, but he didn't voice his doubts. You did good today. Real good. She nodded, still shaky but recovering. Can we go home now? Home. She'd called the mountain cabin home. The word settled into Cade's chest and stayed there, warm and unexpected. Yeah, he said. We can go home. The ride back was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ride down. Comfortable, peaceful, like something had been settled. When they reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Alira slid off the horse and stood there looking at the simple structure like she was seeing it for the first time. Thank you, she said. For what? For teaching me to shoot, for taking me to town, for believing I could do it. She turned to face him. For saving my life. You saved yourself, Cade said. I just gave you the tools. That night they sat by the fire and talked for hours. Alira told him things she'd never spoken about. The worst of what Vernon had done. The fear she'd lived with every day. The way she'd learned to make herself invisible just to survive. Cade shared his own darkness. The friends he'd lost in the war. The guilt he carried for surviving when they hadn't. The years he'd spent wanting to die but lacking the courage to do it. They laid their ghosts out between them like cards on a table, and in the sharing, the ghosts lost some of their power. What do we do now? Alira asked as the fire burned low. We keep going, keep surviving, keep living. Cade added another log to the fire. And we protect what we've built here. You think Vernon will come? Honestly? I don't know, maybe. But if he does, he won't find what he expects. He won't find a victim. He'll find someone who knows how to fight back. Alira smiled at that, a fierce expression that transformed her face. Good. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow started melting in earnest, turning the mountain into a landscape of mud and running water. Cade's trapline started producing again as animals emerged from winter dens. The days grew longer, warmer, and Alira continued to change. She'd started planting seeds in small pots she'd fashioned from tin cans, preparing a garden for when the ground thawed enough. She'd reorganized the entire cabin, creating systems for everything from food storage to firewood. She'd even started teaching herself more advanced sewing, producing clothes that were actually fashionable instead of just functional. More importantly, she'd started smiling. Really smiling, the kind that reached her eyes and made her whole face light up. She'd laugh at Cade's terrible jokes. She'd tease him when he forgot something. She'd even started singing while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. The cabin, which had been a tomb for 5 years, had become something else entirely. One afternoon in late March, Cade came back from checking the trapline to find Alira in the clearing, practicing with the rifle without him. She'd set up her own targets and was running through drills, her movements confident and sure. She'd hear him approach and turned, lowering the weapon. Hope you don't mind, she said. I wanted to keep sharp. I don't mind. You're good. I'm better than good. It wasn't a brag, just a statement of fact. I can outshoot most of the men in town now. You probably can. She smiled at that, pleased with herself in a way that made Cade's chest tight. This was what confidence looked like on her. This was who she'd been meant to be before Vernon broke her down. There's something I've been thinking about, Alira said, walking back to where he stood. The cabin's getting crowded with both of us there. And it's not proper, really, me sleeping in the bed while you take the chair. Cade felt his stomach drop. Are you saying you want to leave? What? No. She looked genuinely surprised. I'm saying we should build an addition, another room, somewhere I can have actual privacy and you can have a real bed again. Oh. Relief washed through him. That's actually a good idea. I've been sketching plans. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, covered in surprisingly detailed drawings. We could extend off the back, use logs from that deadfall down by the creek, put in a real window, maybe even a small stove for heat. Cade studied the plans. They were good, practical and well thought out. This would take weeks to build. So, we've got nothing but time. We'd need more supplies from town. Then we go to town. She met his eyes. I'm not afraid anymore. Let them stare. Let them gossip. I don't care what they think. So they started building. It was hard work, harder than Cade had done in years. They had to fell trees, strip bark, cut logs to length, notch them for fitting. Alira worked alongside him, refusing to be relegated to lighter tasks. She'd swing an axe until her hands blistered, carry logs that were almost too heavy for her, work from dawn until dusk without complaining. "You don't have to prove anything," Cade told her one afternoon when he caught her trying to lift a log that was clearly too heavy. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm building my home." She adjusted her grip. "Now, are you going to help me or just stand there?" They worked together, and slowly the addition took shape. 4 walls rising from a foundation of stone, a doorway connecting to the main cabin, a window frame waiting for glass they'd ordered from town, a roof that sloped properly for snow runoff. It wasn't professional work. There were gaps that would need chinking and spots where the logs didn't fit quite right. But it was solid, and it was theirs. The day they finished the roof, they stood back and admired their work. Alira's face was streaked with dirt, and her dress was torn in 3 places, but she was beaming. "We did it," she said. "We did. I have my own room." "You do." She turned to him, and there was something in her expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you for everything, for giving me a place where I can be myself, for teaching me I'm worth more than what Vernon said I was, for—" "You don't have to thank me," Kate interrupted. "You've given me just as much. More, probably. This cabin was just a place I came to die slowly. You made it a home." They stood there in the fading light, 2 broken people who'd somehow managed to build something good out of their shared damage, and Cade realized he hadn't thought about dying in months. He'd been too busy living. That night, Alira moved her belongings into the new room. It wasn't much: the same chest of clothes, her sewing kit, the book she'd read a dozen times, the wooden box of buttons. But it was hers. Her space. Her sanctuary. Cade reclaimed the bed in the main room and discovered he couldn't sleep. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because the cabin felt wrong without Alira's breathing nearby. He'd gotten used to her presence, to the small sounds she made in her sleep, to knowing she was safe where he could see her. He was still lying awake an hour later when he heard her door open. She padded across the floor and appeared in the doorway to the main room. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Bed's too soft. Forgot what that felt like." "Liar. You're worried about me being in a separate room." He couldn't argue with that. "Maybe. I'm fine. Door locks from the inside. Windows small enough no one could fit through. I have the rifle right next to the bed." She smiled. "You taught me well." "I know. It's not rational. Fear usually isn't." She moved closer. "But we're safe here, both of us. You made sure of that." "I hope so." "I know so." She hesitated, then said, "Good night, Cade." It was the first time she'd used his first name. It sounded different in her voice, warmer somehow. "Good night, Alira." She went back to her room, and this time when her door closed, Cade finally felt himself relax. Not because she was out of sight, but because she'd chosen to come back. Chosen to stay. Chosen him. The thought should have scared him. Instead, it just made him smile as he drifted off to sleep. Spring continued its slow arrival, and with it came a peace Cade had never expected to find. The mountain was theirs. The cabin was strong. And for the first time in either of their lives, they had something worth protecting. But peace on the frontier never lasted long, and the past had a way of climbing mountains when you least expected it. The warning came on a morning in early April when the last patches of snow were melting into black mud, and the air smelled like wet earth and pine sap. Cade was splitting firewood behind the cabin when he heard Red whinny from the lean-to, a sharp sound of alarm that made him drop the axe and reach for his rifle. He'd learned to trust the horse's instincts during the war. Red had saved his life twice by sensing danger before Cade's one good eye could spot it. He moved quietly to the front of the cabin and scanned the tree line. Nothing. No movement. No sound except the wind through the pines and the distant call of a crow. Then he saw it. A piece of cloth tied to a tree branch about 50 yards down the trail. It was fluttering in the breeze, bright red against the green. Someone had put it there deliberately, recently enough that the knot was still tight. "Alira," he called, keeping his voice low. "Get inside, now." She appeared in the doorway of her room, a basket of seeds in her hands. "What's wrong?" "Someone's been here, marked the trail." He moved back to the door, rifle ready. "Stay away from the windows." She set down the basket and picked up her own rifle without question, her movements quick and efficient. "How many?" "Don't know yet. Could be nothing. Could be. A shout echoed up from somewhere down the mountain. Male voice, calling something he couldn't make out. That's not nothing, Elira said, and her voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. Cade positioned himself at the window, using the frame for cover while he watched the trail. Elira took the opposite window, mirroring his stance. They waited in tense silence. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 3 men emerged from the tree line. Vernon Hale was in the center, looking even worse than he had in February. He was flanked by 2 men Cade didn't recognize, rough types with the hard faces of men who'd spent time on the wrong side of the law. One carried a shotgun, the other had a pistol tucked into his belt. Vernon was shouting now, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Mercer, I know you're in there. Send out my daughter." Cade's jaw clenched. He'd hoped Vernon would stay away after the confrontation in Morrison's store. Should have known better. Desperate men didn't learn lessons. "Stay here," he told Elira. "Don't shoot unless I give the word." "Cade, I mean it. Let me try to talk them down first." He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. The 3 men stopped about 30 yards away, and Vernon's face twisted into something ugly when he saw Cade. "Where is she?" Vernon demanded. "Safe, which is more than she'd be with you." Cade's voice carried across the clearing, calm and flat. "You need to turn around and go back down that mountain." "The hell I will. She's my daughter, my property. She's a free woman. You signed papers saying so." "Those papers don't mean shit." Vernon took a step forward, and the 2 men with him fanned out slightly, trying to flank. Cade noted their positions without moving his rifle. "I want her back. She belongs to me." "Nobody belongs to you, Vernon. Not anymore." "You think you can keep her up here forever? Think you can hide from the law?" "What law?" Cade asked. "Last I checked, buying someone's freedom wasn't illegal. Selling your daughter is morally bankrupt, but you already knew that." The man with the shotgun spoke up then. "We don't want trouble, mister. Just give us the girl and we'll be on our way." "Not happening. Vernon says she stole from him, says she owes him money." "Vernon's a liar." Vernon's face went purple. "You calling me a liar? You one-eyed freak. You got no right." "I've got every right." Cade's voice hardened. "You 3 need to leave. Now, before this gets ugly." 3 against 1, the man with the pistol said, his hand drifting toward his weapon. "I like those odds." "You shouldn't." The standoff hung there, balanced on a knife's edge. Cade could feel his heart hammering, but his hands were steady. This was familiar territory. Not the same as war, but close enough that his body knew what to do even if his mind was screaming. Then Elira's voice rang out from inside the cabin, clear and strong. "He's not alone." She stepped out onto the porch, her rifle raised and aimed directly at Vernon. Her face was pale but composed, her stance perfect. "Hello, Father," she said. "Nice day for a hike." Vernon stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Elira, baby girl, these men are just here to help, to bring you home where you belong." "I am home." "That's not, you don't understand. I've got debts, real bad debts. Men who'll hurt me if I don't pay." His voice took on a wheedling tone that made Cade's skin crawl. "I need you to come back. Need you to help me like you used to. We can work it out. I'll be better, I promise." "You've been promising that my whole life." Elira's aim never wavered. "I'm done believing you. You ungrateful little—" Vernon started forward, and both Cade and Elira shifted their aim in perfect synchronization. "Stop," Cade said quietly. "Right there." Vernon stopped. The 2 men with him exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. Whatever Vernon had paid them, it probably wasn't enough to get shot over. "We got a problem here," the man with the shotgun said slowly. "We were told this was a simple extraction, girl being held against her will. This don't look like that." "Because it's not," Elira said. "I'm here because I choose to be, because this man gave me something my father never did. A choice. I'm not going anywhere." "See, that's a problem for us," the other man said. "We already took Vernon's money, got a reputation to maintain." "Then give him his money back," Cade suggested. "Walk away. Nobody gets hurt." "Can't do that." "Then you're going to have to go through both of us." Cade adjusted his grip on the rifle. "And I promise you, even if you win, at least one of you won't walk off this mountain." The man with the shotgun was studying Cade now, really looking at him for the first time. His eyes caught on the scar, the missing eye, the way Cade held himself. Recognition dawned. "You're that soldier," he said. "From the stories. The one who held Burnside Bridge with a broken rifle and a prayer." Cade didn't confirm or deny it. Didn't matter if the story was about him or not. What mattered was the man believed it. "I ain't dying for $60, the man said, lowering his shotgun. "Vernon, you're on your own." "What? No, we had a deal." "Deal's off. You didn't tell us she could shoot, didn't tell us he was military." The man started backing away. "Come on, Jack, let's go." The other man hesitated, then followed. Vernon watched them go with his mouth hanging open, then turned back to Cade and Elira with desperation written across his face. "Fine. Fine. You want to play it that way?" He pulled a pistol from his coat, old and rusty but probably still functional. "She's coming with me, or she's not leaving this mountain alive." The pistol swung toward Elira. Everything slowed down. Cade saw Vernon's finger tightening on the trigger, saw Elira's eyes widen, saw the exact moment when he had to make a choice. Shoot Vernon and live with killing Elira's father, or trust her to defend herself. He trusted her. Elira fired first. The shot caught Vernon in the right shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying. He went down hard, screaming and clutching the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark against his dirty shirt. Elira lowered her rifle, her face expressionless. She walked down from the porch, boots crunching on gravel, and stood over her father. "I told you," she said quietly. "I told you what would happen if you came up here." Vernon was whimpering, rocking back and forth. "You shot me. You actually shot me. I aimed for your shoulder. If I'd wanted you dead, you'd be dead." She crouched down so she was at eye level with him. "This is the last time I'm going to say this. I am not your daughter anymore. I am not your property. I am not your anything. You don't get to hurt me. You don't get to control me. You don't get to sell me. Those days are over." "I'm bleeding," Vernon gasped. "I need a doctor." "You need to leave. Right now, while you still can." "I can't walk down the mountain like this." Elira stood up and looked at Cade. "What do you think? Should we help him?" Cade walked over, keeping his rifle ready in case Vernon tried something stupid. The wound was bleeding, but not spurting. Shoulder hit, probably missed the major arteries. Vernon would live if he got it treated, which meant Cade couldn't just leave him here to die, even if part of him wanted to. "I'll bandage it," Cade said, "enough to get him to town. After that, he's not our problem." He went inside and came back with clean cloth and whiskey. Vernon screamed when Cade poured alcohol over the wound, then screamed again when he wrapped it tight enough to slow the bleeding. "That'll hold for a few hours," Cade said. "More than you deserve." "You're both crazy," Vernon muttered, his face gray with pain and shock. "Crazy and cruel." "No," Elira said. "We're just done being victims." They hauled Vernon to his feet and pointed him down the trail. He stumbled away, one hand pressed to his shoulder, muttering curses and threats that nobody took seriously. When he was out of sight, Cade turned to Elira. "You okay?" She was staring at her hands. They were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. "I shot him." "You defended yourself." "I shot my own father. He was going to kill you." Cade gently took the rifle from her trembling hands. "You did what you had to do." "I know. She looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes now. Not from regret, but from the weight of it. "I thought I'd feel different. Thought I'd feel guilty or sick or something. But I just feel free." "That's because you are free." He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, letting herself be held for the first time since she'd arrived. "It's over. He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." They stood there for a long time while the sun climbed higher and the birds started singing again. Eventually, Elira pulled away and wiped her eyes. "We should go to town," she said. "Tell them what happened before Vernon does. Make sure everyone knows the truth. You sure you're ready for that?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They rode down to Ashford Bend that same afternoon, arriving as the sun was starting to set. The main street was busy with the end-of-day crowd, and people stopped to stare when they saw Cade and Elira riding in together. Morrison was closing up his store when they arrived. He took one look at their faces and ushered them inside. "What happened?" he asked. "Vernon came to the mountain with hired guns," Cade said. "Tried to take Elira by force. She defended herself." "Is he dead?" "No, wounded. Should have made it to town by now if he went straight there." Morrison rubbed his face. "This is going to cause trouble. You know that, right? Whatever Vernon is, he's still her father. People are going to talk." "Let them talk," Elira said. "I want them to know the truth. I want everyone in this town to know exactly what kind of man Vernon Hale is." Elira, No, she cut him off. "I'm done being quiet. I'm done protecting him. He tried to kill me today. He's tried to destroy me my whole life. People need to know." Morrison looked between them, then sighed. "All right. There's a town meeting tomorrow night anyway. Budget discussions. Usually nobody shows up, but if you want to speak your piece, that's the place to do it." "I'll be there," Elira said. The next evening, they rode into town again. Elira had dressed in her best clothes, the dress she'd sewn herself over the winter, her hair pinned up properly, her boots cleaned and polished. She looked like a different person from the hollow-eyed woman Cade had bought 6 months ago. The town hall was a converted warehouse on the edge of the settlement, drafty and cold even with a fire going. About 30 people had shown up, more than usual according to Morrison. Word had spread about Vernon's shoulder wound and the mountain confrontation, and people wanted answers. Vernon himself was there, sitting in the back with his arm in a sling and hate burning in his eyes. He'd been to a doctor, apparently, though from the looks of it, the wound was already getting infected. Served him right. The mayor, a tired-looking man named Fletcher, who'd been trying to keep Ashford Bend alive for the past decade, called the meeting to order and went through the boring business of budgets and road repairs. Then he cleared his throat. "There's been some talk around town," he said carefully, "about Vernon Hale and his daughter, about an incident on the mountain. I think it's time we heard the truth of it." Vernon tried to stand up, but Fletcher waved him down. "Not from you, Vernon. You've had your say at the saloon for the past day and a half. I want to hear from the girl." Elira stood up, and every eye in the room fixed on her. Cade could see her hands trembling, but her voice when she spoke was clear and steady. "My name is Elira Hale," she began. "Some of you knew my mother. Some of you have watched me grow up in this town, and all of you know my father." She paused, looking around the room. "What you might not know is what it was like living with him, what it was like being his daughter." Then she told them. She told them about the hunger, about going days without eating while Vernon drank away their money. She told them about the beatings, the locked closets, the times he'd threatened her life when he was too drunk to remember she existed. She told them about her mother's death, about how Vernon had refused to fetch a doctor because he was too busy at the saloon. She told them about the day he tried to sell her, standing outside Morrison's store like she was livestock. The room was silent. Some people looked shocked. Others looked guilty, like they'd suspected but never acted. A few women were crying. "6 months ago, Cade Mercer gave me a choice," Elira continued. "He offered me work, safety, a place where I didn't have to be afraid every moment of every day. And yesterday, my father tried to take that away. He came to the mountain with armed men and attempted to force me back into the life I escaped from. When I refused, he pulled a gun and aimed it at me. So I defended myself." She pulled aside her shawl, revealing the rifle she'd brought with her. "Cade taught me to shoot. Taught me I didn't have to be a victim. Taught me I was worth more than what my father said I was. And when my father tried to kill me, I used what I learned to stop him." Vernon finally managed to get to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "That's a lie! All of it! She's making it up to turn you against me!" "Sit down, Vernon," Morrison said from the front row. "I won't sit down. She's my daughter. I have rights." "You gave up your rights when you sold her," a woman's voice called out. It was Ruth Cassidy from the feed store. "We all knew what was happening, Vernon. We just didn't want to admit it." Other voices joined in, people who'd seen the bruises, people who'd heard the screaming from Vernon's house, people who'd watched Elira grow thinner and more silent over the years and done nothing. Vernon's face went from red to white. "You're all against me, all of you, taking her side because she's—" "Because she's telling the truth," Fletcher interrupted. "Vernon, I've known you for 15 years. I've watched you drink yourself into ruin. I've listened to you complain about your daughter like she was a burden instead of a blessing, and I've ignored it because it was easier than doing something about it." He stood up. "But I'm not ignoring it anymore. What happened on that mountain yesterday was self-defense. Anyone with eyes can see that. And if you ever try to harm that girl again, you'll answer to this entire town. Are we clear? Vernon looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. Even the men who usually drank with him at the saloon were looking away, unwilling to defend him. You're all making a mistake, Vernon said finally. All of you. She'll turn on you too. Just wait. He stumbled out of the town hall, his good hand clutching his wounded shoulder. The door slammed behind him, and the silence he left was heavy with things unsaid. Fletcher cleared his throat. I think we're done for tonight. Meeting adjourned. People started filing out, but several stopped to speak to Elira. Women mostly, offering quiet words of support or sharing their own stories of abuse survived. Cade hung back, giving her space to accept their acknowledgement. Morrison approached him. That took guts. What she did up there? She's got more guts than anyone I've ever met, Cade said. You did a good thing taking her in, giving her a chance. I think she saved me as much as I saved her. Morrison nodded. Town's going to be talking about this for months. Hope you're ready for that. Don't care what they talk about, as long as they leave her alone. When the hall had mostly cleared, Elira came over. Her face was flushed and her eyes were bright, but she looked lighter somehow, unburdened. Ready to go home? Cade asked. More than ready. They walked out into the night, and as they reached the horses, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She couldn't have been more than 18, thin and nervous-looking. Excuse me, she said quietly. Are you Elira? I am. I heard what you said in there about your father, about escaping. The girl twisted her hands together. I was wondering, is there really a place where someone could be safe, where men can't hurt you? Elira looked at Cade, and he saw the question in her eyes. He nodded slightly. There is, Elira said. Up on the mountain. It's not easy. The work's hard and the winters are brutal, but you'd be safe. You'd be free. Could I come with you? I can work, I can cook and clean, and... What's your name? Elira asked gently. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, are you in danger? The girl nodded, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. My stepfather, he drinks. He gets angry. Last week She trailed off, unable to finish. Elira took her hand. Get your things, whatever you can carry. Meet us at Morrison's store in an hour. Can you do that? Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Sarah hurried away and Cade raised an eyebrow. We're taking in strays now? You took me in. That was different. How? He didn't have a good answer for that. Fair point. An hour later, they rode out of Ashford Bend with Sarah Mitchell perched behind Elira on Red, clutching a small bag that contained everything she owned. The girl didn't look back at the town, and neither did Elira. They climbed the mountain under starlight, 3 people instead of 2, and Cade realized the cabin was going to need another expansion. But that was all right. They had time, they had tools, they had each other. When they reached the cabin, Sarah looked at it with the same wonder Elira had shown 6 months ago. It's beautiful. It's home, Elira said. Come on, let's get you settled. That night, Cade sat on the porch and listened to the sounds of 2 women's voices inside, talking and laughing. The cabin that had been silent for 5 years was becoming something else, something bigger than just survival. A sanctuary, a refuge, a place where broken things could heal. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if Vernon would cause more trouble or if other people would come looking for help, didn't know if they could really build something lasting on this mountain. But for the first time since the war ended, he was willing to find out. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the darkness a wolf howled. Cade loaded his rifle, checked the locks, and went inside to where warmth and voices waited. The mountain stood guard around them, silent and strong, sheltering the small lights of human hope against the vast indifference of the wilderness. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. Sarah Mitchell cried herself to sleep that first night in the addition Elira and Cade had built, and Elira sat with her until the sobbing quieted into exhausted breathing. She reminds me of myself, Elira said when she came back to the main room where Cade was cleaning his rifle by lamplight. 6 months ago, that was me. You think she'll be all right? Eventually, same as I was, same as you were. She sat down across from him, her face tired but determined. We're collecting broken people now, aren't we? Looks that way. Good. She smiled slightly. The world has enough of the other kind. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah slowly emerged from her shell. She was quieter than Elira had been, more skittish, prone to disappearing into corners when voices got too loud. But she worked hard, learning the rhythms of mountain life with the desperate focus of someone who needed purpose to survive. Cade taught her the same things he'd taught Elira: how to shoot, how to read animal tracks, how to know when weather was coming by the way the wind changed. Sarah wasn't a natural at any of it, but she tried, and that counted for more than talent. One afternoon in late April, Cade came back from checking the trapline to find both women working in the garden plot Elira had started. They'd cleared a section of ground near the cabin and were planting vegetables, their hands dark with soil, talking in low voices that suggested shared confidences. He stood there watching them for a moment, these two survivors teaching each other how to grow things in Rocky Mountain dirt, and something shifted in his chest. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was building something that might actually last. Admiring your kingdom? Elira called out, noticing him. Just watching you two destroy my peace and quiet. You love it, she shot back, grinning. He did. That was the problem. He'd gotten used to the noise, the presence of other people, the feeling of belonging to something larger than himself. The thought of going back to solitude made his chest tight. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, which Cade had extended to accommodate 3 people, Sarah spoke up hesitantly. I've been thinking, she said, about the town, about other women who might be in situations like mine, like Elira's. What about them? Cade asked. They don't know there's a way out. They think they're stuck. If they knew about this place, she looked around the cabin. If they knew they had options, you want to tell them, Elira said. It wasn't a question. Don't you think we should? Elira looked at Cade. What do you think? He thought about it carefully, aware that his answer would shape what came next. The cabin could maybe hold 1 or 2 more people if they built another addition. But more than that, they'd need more space, more supplies, more everything. I think, he said slowly, that we need to be smart about it. We can't save everyone, can't fix every problem. But if there are women who need help, who are willing to work and defend themselves, then maybe we try. There's a woman in town, Sarah said. Emma Wright. Her husband beats her. Everyone knows it. Nobody does anything about it because he's on the town council. She twisted her hands together. If we could get her out, we'd make an enemy of a council member, Cade finished. Yes. Good, Elira said firmly. Let them be enemies. I'm tired of being scared of powerful men. So they made a plan. It took 3 weeks to execute. They couldn't just ride into town and announce they were harboring abused women. That would bring the kind of attention that got people killed. Instead, they worked quietly, spreading word through Morrison and a few other trusted allies. The mountain cabin was a place of refuge. No questions asked, no judgments made, just safety and hard work. Emma Wright was the first to respond. She showed up one night with 2 black eyes and a broken rib, having walked the entire distance from town in the dark. Elira and Sarah took her in without hesitation, cleaned her wounds, and gave her Cade's bed while he moved to sleeping on the floor. 3 days later, a widow named Margaret Chen arrived with her 2 young daughters. Her husband had died in a mining accident, and his family had been trying to force her into marriage with his brother. She'd refused. They'd threatened to take her children. I can work, Margaret said, standing in the cabin doorway with fierce pride despite her obvious terror. I can hunt. I can build. Just don't send us back. Nobody's sending you anywhere, Cade said. By May, there were 8 people living on the mountain. The cabin had become a small compound. Cade and the women had built 2 more structures, a bunkhouse for sleeping and a larger building for cooking and communal space. They'd expanded the garden, dug a proper well, built a smokehouse for preserving meat. The trapline had been extended and everyone took turns checking it. The work was constant and exhausting, but nobody complained. Every woman who arrived brought skills and determination. Margaret taught them advanced woodcraft her father had taught her. Emma, it turned out, was brilliant with numbers and took over managing their supplies and planning for winter. Sarah had a gift for animal husbandry and started building a chicken coop. Elira held it all together, organizing work schedules and settling disputes and teaching newcomers how to defend themselves. She'd become something Cade had never expected, a leader. The frightened woman who'd stood on Morrison's porch peeling an apple while her father sold her had transformed into someone who commanded respect through quiet competence. Cade watched her one morning as she instructed 3 women in rifle technique, her voice calm and authoritative, and realized he'd fallen in love with her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was in love with Elira Hale. Had been for months, probably, but had been too damaged and too cautious to admit it. "You're staring," Morrison said. Cade nearly jumped. He hadn't heard the man approach. Morrison had started making regular trips up the mountain, bringing supplies and news from town. "Just thinking," Cade muttered. "About her?" Morrison nodded toward Elira. "Can't say I blame you. She's something special." "She is." "You planning to do anything about it?" "Like what?" Morrison gave him a look that suggested Cade was being deliberately dense. "Like telling her. Like seeing if she feels the same way. She's been through enough without me complicating things." "You really think you'd be complicating things?" Morrison shook his head. "That woman looks at you like you hung the moon. Everyone can see it except apparently you." Cade didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if Morrison was right or if he was seeing what he wanted to see. Before he could figure it out, a shout went up from the edge of the clearing. One of the women on watch, they'd established a rotation after the incident with Vernon, was pointing down the trail. "Riders coming! 6 of them!" Everyone scrambled into defensive positions. Cade grabbed his rifle and positioned himself at the front of the compound while Elira and the others took cover. They'd practiced this scenario, but practice and reality were very different things. The riders emerged from the tree line and Cade's stomach dropped. 5 men he didn't recognize, all armed, and leading them was Vernon Hale. Vernon's shoulder had healed badly. Cade could see that even from a distance. The man sat crooked in his saddle, favoring his right side, and his face was gaunt with pain and infection, but his eyes burned with the kind of hate that didn't need a healthy body to be dangerous. "I told you I'd come back," Vernon called out. "Told you all of you would regret crossing me." "You need to leave, Vernon," Cade said, keeping his rifle ready. "Right now. Not until I get what's mine, my daughter, and compensation for what she stole from me. She didn't steal anything. You have no claim on her." "I have every claim. She's blood. She's mine." Vernon's voice cracked with fury. "And all these other whores you're hiding up here, they belong to someone too. Husbands, fathers, men who have rights. The only right you have," Elira's voice rang out, "is to shut your mouth and ride away." She'd stepped out from cover, her rifle aimed directly at Vernon. Around the compound, other women emerged, all armed, all ready. 8 rifles pointed at 6 men. Vernon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you can threaten me? You think I'm afraid of a bunch of women playing soldier?" "You should be," Margaret Chen said coldly. "We've all got reasons to pull these triggers. Want to find out how good our aim is?" One of Vernon's men shifted nervously in his saddle. "Vernon, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Vernon snarled. Then to Cade, "I'm giving you one chance. Send out the women, all of them, or we'll take them by force." "You can try," Cade said. "But look around, Vernon. Look at what you're up against. Every woman here knows how to shoot. Every one of them is fighting for her life. You really think your men are going to risk dying for your vendetta?" He could see doubt creeping into the faces of Vernon's hired guns. These were men who fought for money, not principle. Dying in a shootout on a mountain for a drunk's wounded pride wasn't what they'd signed up for. "I'll make it simple," Elira said, walking forward until she was standing beside Cade. "You've got 2 choices, Father. You can ride away right now and never come back, or you can try to take us by force and we'll defend ourselves, which means some of you will die. Maybe all of you. Is your pride worth that?" Vernon's hand moved toward his pistol. 3 rifles cracked simultaneously. Dirt exploded at Vernon's horse's feet. The animal reared, nearly throwing Vernon from the saddle. When the dust settled, Vernon was white-faced and shaking, and his men had their hands up. "Next shots won't be warnings," Emma Wright called out. "They'll be final." The standoff held for a long, tense moment. Then one of Vernon's men turned his horse and started back down the trail. Another followed. Then a third. Within seconds, Vernon was sitting alone, his hired courage having evaporated. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Yes, it is," Elira said. "It's been over since the day I left your house. You just didn't want to accept it, but I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done being afraid. And I'm done with you." She lowered her rifle slightly. "Go home, Vernon. Die drunk and alone if that's what you want. But leave us alone. Because the next time you come up this mountain, I won't aim for your shoulder." Vernon stared at her with something that might have been recognition, like he was finally seeing who she'd become and understanding that the terrified girl he'd controlled for 20 years was gone forever. "You're not my daughter," he said finally. "No," Elira agreed. "I'm not. I'm someone better." Vernon turned his horse and rode away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They watched him disappear down the trail, and nobody spoke until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Then Emma started laughing. It was a wild, slightly hysterical sound, but genuine. Sarah joined in, then Margaret, and soon all the women were laughing and crying and hugging each other, the tension breaking like a storm. Cade found himself pulled into the celebration, these women who'd learned to fight for themselves treating him like he'd won them a victory, when really, they'd won it themselves. When the excitement finally died down and people started drifting back to their work, Elira stayed beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? You handled that yourself. For teaching me I could, for believing in me when nobody else did, for building this place where we could all be free." "We built it together," Cade corrected. "All of us." She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "Cade, I need to tell you something." "All right. She stopped, searching for words. "These past 6 months have been the best of my life, being here, working beside you, building something that matters. You saved me, and I know you don't want to hear that. You don't think you're any kind of hero, but you are. You're my hero, and She took a deep breath. "I love you. I'm in love with you. And I needed to say it before I lost my courage." Cade's heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Elira, you don't have to say anything back," she said quickly. "I know this might not be what you want. I know I'm probably not what you want. But I couldn't keep it inside anymore." "Stop," Cade said gently. He took her hands in his. "You think you're not what I want? Elira, you're everything I want. You're the reason I wake up in the morning. The reason this place feels like home instead of just somewhere I'm hiding. I love you too. I've loved you for months. I was just too much of a coward to say it." She stared at him. "Really?" "Really. But I'm damaged, broken. I've got scars and nightmares and—" "So do I," he interrupted. "We're both broken. But maybe that's okay. Maybe broken people understand each other better than whole ones ever could." Elira's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You're terrible at romantic speeches." "I know, but I mean every word." She kissed him then, and it was awkward and perfect and everything Cade had been too afraid to hope for. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, she laughed. "What now?" she asked. "Now we keep building, keep growing, keep making this place into something that lasts." "Together?" "Together." Summer arrived with a vengeance, turning the mountain green and lush. The garden flourished beyond anyone's expectations, producing vegetables that kept the compound fed and allowed them to preserve food for winter. The chickens Sarah had raised started laying eggs. Margaret's hunting skills kept them supplied with meat, and more women kept arriving. Some came fleeing abuse. Others came running from arranged marriages or impossible debts or lives that had become unbearable. They came because word had spread through the frontier settlements. There was a place in the mountains where women could be safe, where they could work and learn and defend themselves, where nobody owned them and nobody hurt them. By August, there were 15 people living on the mountain. They'd built 4 more structures and were planning a 5th. The compound had become a small village, complete with designated areas for different tasks. They'd even established trade relationships with a few sympathetic merchants in Ashford Bend, trading preserved food and handcrafted goods for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. The town's attitude toward them had shifted too. What had started as scandal had gradually transformed into grudging respect. These women had turned a dying mountain into a thriving community. They'd proven they could survive without men controlling them. Some people in town hated that. But others, especially other women, looked at the mountain compound with something like hope. One evening in late August, as the sun set in shades of orange and purple, Cade and Elira sat on the porch of the original cabin. They'd kept it as their private space while the compound grew around them. "Can you believe this?" Illyra asked, watching women move between buildings, talking and laughing. "6 months ago, I was too scared to speak. Now look at what we've built." "What you've built," Cade corrected. "I just provided the location. You provided more than that. You provided the example. Showed us all that broken people can heal, that damaged things can become strong." Cade thought about that. About the man he'd been when he first came to this mountain. Suicidal, isolated, convinced his only purpose was to die slowly, where nobody had to watch. And now he was part of something larger than himself. Part of a community built on shared survival and mutual protection. "You know what Vernon got wrong?" Illyra said suddenly. "What's that?" "He thought owning people made him powerful, but real power isn't about control, it's about trust. About building something together that's stronger than any one person could make alone." She gestured at the compound. "This is power. Women choosing to work together, choosing to defend each other, choosing to build lives that matter." "You sound like a revolutionary," Cade said, smiling. "Maybe I am. Is that a problem?" "Not even a little bit." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge. Then Illyra said, "I heard from Morrison yesterday. Vernon died." Cade looked at her sharply. "When?" "Last week. Infection from the shoulder wound finally got him. He was too stubborn to see a doctor until it was too late." Her face was unreadable. "I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe, or guilt. But I just feel nothing. He was my father, but he stopped being family a long time ago." "You don't owe him your grief," Cade said quietly. "I know. It's just strange, realizing he can't hurt me anymore. Can't hurt anyone anymore." She looked at Cade. "Is it wrong that I'm glad he's gone?" "No. You're allowed to feel however you feel. There's no right way to mourn someone who hurt you." She nodded, accepting that. "Morrison also said there are people in town talking about starting something similar to what we've done here. A refuge for women. Maybe even multiple refuges across the territory." "What do you think about that?" "I think it's wonderful. I think the more places like this exist, the fewer women will have to suffer like I did, like Sarah did, like all of us did." She turned to face him fully. "But I also think we need to be prepared. Change threatens people, especially people who benefit from the way things are. We might have more trouble coming." "Let it come," Cade said. "We'll face it together. As fall approached, bringing with it the first hints of coming winter, the compound continued to grow. They'd established regular patrols, improved their defenses, and created systems for everything from food distribution to conflict resolution. They'd become efficient and organized, a small society built on principles of mutual aid and shared defense. But more importantly, they'd become a family. Not a traditional family, not anything that would be recognized by polite society, but a family nonetheless, bound together by shared trauma and shared hope, by the understanding that everyone here had been broken once and had chosen to heal together. One October morning, Cade woke to find Illyra already up and dressed, standing at the window of their cabin and looking out at the compound. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we've come, about what we've built." She turned to him. "About what comes next." "What does come next?" "I don't know, but I know it'll be better than what came before." She came and sat on the edge of the bed. "We've proven something important here, Cade. We've proven that people don't have to stay in situations that destroy them, that there are always choices, even when it seems like there aren't, that community can be chosen instead of inherited." "You've proven all that," Cade said. "You and the other women. I just watched it happen." "You did more than watch. You made it possible." She took his hand. "Do you ever regret it? Taking me in that day? Changing your whole life?" "Not for a second. Even though it's noisy and chaotic and nothing like the peace you came here for, especially because of that." He pulled her closer. "Turns out I didn't need peace. I needed purpose. I needed to be part of something that mattered. You gave me that." She kissed him, soft and lingering, and Cade marveled at how natural it felt. How right. 6 months ago, the idea of trusting someone enough to love them would have seemed impossible. Now, it was as essential as breathing. The winter that followed was the harshest Cade had seen in his 5 years on the mountain. Snow fell in quantities that buried the compound for weeks at a time. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze inside the buildings. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate and had to ration food more carefully than anticipated. But they survived. They survived because they worked together, because everyone contributed, because when one person weakened, others stepped in to help, because they'd built something strong enough to withstand the cold. And when spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing green back to the mountain, they emerged stronger than before. 2 more women had joined them over the winter, brought by friends who'd heard about the refuge. The compound now housed 18 people, and they were planning to expand again. On a warm May afternoon, almost exactly a year after Elira had first arrived, Cade stood at the edge of the clearing and looked down at what they'd created. The compound sprawled across the mountainside now, multiple buildings, cultivated gardens, animal pens, a small forge where Margaret had started doing metalwork. Smoke rose from several chimneys. Children's laughter echoed from where Margaret's daughters were playing. Women moved between buildings with purpose and confidence. It looked like a settlement, like civilization carved out of wilderness, like hope made visible. Elira came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Remember when it was just you up here?" she asked. "Barely. Feels like that was a lifetime ago." "It was. We're different people now." "Better people?" "I'd like to think so." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know what I realized the other day? I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy. I don't think I've ever felt this way before in my life." "Me neither," Kate admitted. "Turns out happiness is easier when you're not carrying it alone." They stood there watching their community go about its business, and Cade thought about the man who'd ridden into Ashford Bend a year ago. That man had been ready to let Vernon sell his daughter because confronting ugliness was easier than getting involved. Had been prepared to walk away and let someone else's tragedy unfold without him. That man was gone now, killed not by violence, but by connection, by love, by the slow, steady work of building something that mattered. "What are you thinking?" Elira asked. "That we should get married." She pulled back to look at him, eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me. Not because it's proper or expected, but because I love you and I want everyone to know it. Because I want to promise you publicly what I've already promised privately, that I'll stand with you no matter what comes. That you're my family now, my home." Elira's eyes filled with tears. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Yes." She laughed, wiping her eyes. "Yes, obviously yes. I thought you'd never ask." They were married a month later in a ceremony that bore no resemblance to traditional weddings. No church, no minister. Instead, Morrison came up from town to officiate, reading words that Cade and Elira had written themselves. The entire compound attended, these women who'd become sisters standing witness as 2 broken people promised to keep fixing each other. When it was over and everyone had celebrated with food and music and dancing that went late into the night, Cade and Elira retreated to their cabin. "Mrs. Mercer," Cade said, testing out the name. "I'm keeping Hale," Elira corrected gently. "Not because of my father, because of my mother. She deserves to have her name carried by someone who'll honor it." "Elira Hale it is, then." "Besides," she added with a smile, "we're building something new here. Maybe we don't need to follow old rules about women taking their husbands' names. Maybe we make our own rules." I like that idea. As summer faded into fall and fall into another winter, the compound continued to evolve. They'd established formal governance now, decisions made by consensus, disputes resolved through mediation, everyone having an equal voice. They'd created a school where Margaret's daughters and the other children who'd arrived were taught reading and writing and mathematics. They'd built a small library, books donated by sympathetic people from town. They'd become more than a refuge. They'd become a model for what was possible when people chose cooperation over domination. News of the mountain compound spread beyond Ashford Bend. Other settlements started similar projects. Women fleeing bad situations had options now, multiple places they could go for safety. The network grew organically, connected by shared purpose and mutual support. Vernon Hale had tried to sell his daughter for $60, thinking her worth was measured in currency. He'd died never understanding that what he'd lost that day wasn't property, but a person. Someone with infinite value that couldn't be calculated or controlled. And Elira, the woman who'd stood on a porch peeling an apple with practiced calm while her father bartered her life away, had become something her father could never have imagined. A leader. A teacher. A symbol of what survival could look like when you refused to stay broken. 2 years after that first purchase, Cade stood on the same porch where Elira had once stood and looked out at the compound. The original cabin had been preserved as a landmark of sorts, a reminder of where it all started. But around it, life thrived. Elira came out to join him, settling into the chair he'd occupied that first night while she slept in the bed behind him. So much had changed, so much had stayed the same. "What are you brooding about?" she asked. "Not brooding, thinking." "About what?" "About how I came here to die and found a reason to live instead. About how buying your freedom ended up buying mine." He looked at her. "About how the worst decision I ever made turned out to be the best." "It wasn't the worst decision," Elira said. "It was the bravest. You saw something wrong and you fixed it, even though it cost you everything you had." "I got more back than I gave." "We both did." They sat in comfortable silence as evening settled over the mountain. Somewhere in the compound, someone started playing a fiddle. Voices rose in song, slightly off-key but enthusiastic, the sounds of people living without fear. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked away that day?" Elira asked. "If you'd let my father sell me to someone else?" Cade had thought about that more times than he could count. "I think you would have survived anyway, found your own way out. You're stronger than you know." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." She reached for his hand. "I'm glad it was you." "Me too." The stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched Cade arrive on this mountain 5 years ago, broken and alone and convinced his story was over. Those stars had witnessed everything that came after: the purchase, the transformation, the building of something impossible. They'd witnessed two damaged people learning that broken things could be fixed, that scars could become strengths, that the darkest parts of our past didn't have to define our future. Cade had learned that saving someone else could save yourself. That home wasn't a place, but a choice to build something with people who understood your damage because they carried their own. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone willing to grow alongside you, learning and failing and trying again. And Elira had learned that her voice mattered, that she was worth more than anyone's valuation of her, that the frightened girl who'd been sold for $60 could become someone who changed the world, one rescued woman at a time. The mountain stood silent around them, eternal and indifferent. But on its slopes, small lights flickered in cabin windows. Voices carried on the wind. Life persisted in the face of wilderness. They'd built something good here, something that would outlast them both. Not perfect. Nothing built by broken people ever was. But real and true and worth every moment of struggle it had taken to create. Cade pulled Elira closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. Two people who'd started as strangers, bound by a transaction that should have been shameful, had become something neither of them could have imagined. They'd become whole, not by erasing their damage or pretending their scars didn't exist, but by acknowledging that everyone is broken in some way, and that's okay. That community isn't built by perfect people, but by damaged ones who choose to stand together anyway. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead, and on a mountain where a lonely man had once waited to die, life continued in all its messy, beautiful, imperfect glory. That was the truth Vernon Hale had never understood, that you couldn't own people, you could only invite them to build alongside you, and hope they chose to stay. Elira had chosen to stay, had chosen Cade, and the mountain and the community they'd created together. And in that choice, in all the small daily choices that followed, they'd both found something more valuable than any amount of money could buy. They'd found home,